My name is Lyle Harter. This is my farm. We have 65 acres fenced. We graze dairy heifers for a local dairy. Currently I have 42 head. These are all replacement heifers, none are bred. On that 65 acres we have 15 separate paddocks, some ranging from 4 acres up to 7 acres. We rotationally graze. They get moved every 2 days. There's a combination of red clover, timothy, trefoil in the forage base. We move the tank. The place is split up into 2 halves, and we move the water tank every time they move. I have an oiler set up with a mineral box on it for insecticide. We don't have a real bad fly problem here, but we do what we can to keep them more comfortable. We also have fly traps set up throughout the facility to help catch some flies. Mostly catches the house flies, but they are also a nuisance to cattle, and I figure any insects that I can keep off them, that keeps them a little more comfortable. We've used poly wire for our separation fences. The perimeter is a 5-strand high tensile with 3 electrified, and then I split the whole facility with just one single hot wire right down through the center, and that's 12 gauge high tensile. Other than that, that's about it.
All right, so what we're doing here today is repeating some plot clipping that we got started a year ago. And the reason that we're doing it is it gives us some more real-life data that fits right to this farm as to what kind of forage production is out here at this farm, and that can then be used to work into some of the calculations that we do to determine, you know, how many animals should we run out here, what can it handle. And a real important part of that is when you look at the forage base, it's like, how much of that do you include in the calculations? How much should be available to the animals? And one of the things that I guess I'll say science has continued to verify and re-verify is that 4 inches is a pretty important minimum stubble height with grazing, sometimes 3 inches depending on the species that you have. But what they found, no matter what university you go to, you Google it, you look at, you know, how low should I graze a pasture and still be sustainable, meaning like I'm not damaging the plants out there, I'm not losing the desirable plants and having them replaced with something less desirable, and you're going to find that 4 inches comes up time and time and time again. No matter what part of the country you look in, whether it's Canada, whether it's the US, that's pretty important. So with our plots, that we try to clip one that's 4 inches, and with that, what we're saying is anything above 4 inches then is usable forage. As long as we have the 4-inch minimum here, then the plant still has everything it needs to maintain the same root system and continue to grow the root system. There's enough residual leaf area left so that it will immediately start to continue at a level of photosynthesis that will photosynthesis, maybe that's the word. That's the word. That's a word. It's a big word, but that's how plants function, how they grow leaf. But leaf area is really critical. So this leaf area is like solar panels, and what they have found again with the research is that at 4 inches there's still enough, you know, leaf area left to do an adequate amount of photosynthesis to sustain the plant and to regrow more leaf area for the next time that we may want to come through and graze it. So,
and to limit damage to the roots too.
Yes. So we clip at 4 inches, and that gives us a real good estimate of what usable forage we have here. We also clip one down to 1 inch, which is a way to compare that if you graze it much closer to the ground, what happens over the course of a growing season.
And you can see the difference right here
After 1 year, there is a noticeable difference in what we have growing here. If you look from left to right, you'll see the right side has apparently much more grass component, and the left side is dandelions, more open spaces in there because it was clipped at 1 inch all season long to simulate kind of what close grazing can do to a plant community. It's what we would expect to find, but we always like to do it just as a comparison. So what we will then do here is we'll clip off the forage that's above 4 inches. We air dry it for a few months in my garage, and then we'll weigh it. And from that, we can run some calculations to say, well, is 42 animals at 800 pounds each, is this sustaining it or not? Or could maybe he can run a few more? Or maybe we need to cut back a couple animals. And that's what this can tell us. So,
without going too much into detail, can you just explain the square that you have here and...
Yep. So
how
this...
you set up the forage plot right here?
Yeah.
Stand up. So yes, both good questions. How do we select the location? So it's very subjective, and what we're always looking for is, well, we think that this spot kind of represents all the pastures here. Like what we see growing here is kind of what you see where you're standing and where Lyle's standing, and over here it's all kind of similar. So that's how we decide to pick a spot. And what was the other question?
The square itself.
Oh, the square itself.
Is
So
this fenced off?
it is. We keep, it's an exclosure so that when the animals are in here, they don't affect our data collection. We pulled the fence off before you guys all got over here. So the size of the square, that's 1/4 of a meter. And so I used to do 1 whole meter clippings. Well, that takes a long time, and I lost interest in clipping very quickly, and I decided to downsize it so I could get more plots done in the same amount of time, which actually gives you a better sample size, you know, a more representative sample size. And the other nice thing about clipping it and doing it by grams is when I weigh the air-dried forage in the bag, let's say it's 40 grams, you just multiply it by 40 and I have pounds per acre of forage that's available. If it was the big meter, then you just multiply it by 10 if we had a full meter size. So that's how we that's why we use the size of a frame that we use, and again, how we try to pick a site that is very representative.
And in some states you'll see circles. It doesn't matter as long as you know the size and the space, and then you can extrapolate too. Sometimes you'll see you just throw one out just to get an idea. You would just throw it randomly in the field. In this case, we're coming back to the same one because
we're also looking at how does it change over time.
Right.
So if we only did it here 1 year and then moved on, we wouldn't be able to capture what happens if year after year after year you keep grazing it low, We can see just in 1 year there's been an apparent change in the plant community composition.
It's good to see trend.
Just 1 year, so it's a good way to see trend. Yep.
We're not getting any nutrients on those spots either. That's also the impact of that, right?
That's part of in a way that's maybe a detriment to having going to the same place year after year after year. I think though for the first handful of years it's probably not a big deal. It's close enough to where there may be nutrients, but I do question it. Like at some of the places where we've been clipping now for 7 or 8 years, it appears to me that the stuff in the plots is probably less than outside where it is getting nutrients from the grazing animals. That's something I think I'm seeing,
Stands to reason.
and trying to talk myself out of clipping plots at my house when I don't feel like doing it. Like, need to move these. But
So here he is pretty much finished with clipping this square. One thing we didn't mention is he's got on that PVC underneath, there's feet on it to help him get that
4-inch minimum height.
So he's got them all clipped here. We put it all in the box.
Only things that are rooted inside too, so that's why I sit and do this on the edges. If it's not rooted in here, I don't want it.
because that will mess with all the
Yeah,
calculations.
and you can, sometimes I just hand pluck to finish up.
Just like the cow.
And then once you get the clippings in this, he will transfer it to this paper bag that he'll keep in, has the name, the date, that it's the plot that has 4 inches, which plot number it is. On this one you can see plot 1, 4 inch, and then today's date. And then he'll put it in there, close it up, let it dry in his garage, and go from there. So next he will do the 1 inch plot next to this one.
So look at these 2 plots that we've just finished clipping. You can see an obvious difference in what's left. 1 inch on the left, 4 inches on the right. Pretty noticeable difference in the biomass and also the height of clipping. And you can even see some of the differences in the forage species that are in there and the quantities of them. So now we'll take the biomass that we clipped, air dry it for a few months, and weigh it. And then we take the grams per quarter meter plot, and we multiply that by 40, and that'll give us pounds per acre of production out here. As you can imagine, and what makes sense is, on the first clipping each year, the 1 inch always has more than the 4 inch, right? Because there's 3 inches there that we didn't clip. The theory is that because of all the extra leaf area we left, that over the course of the growing season, it will, you know, significantly outperform the 1 inch. And by the end of the year, you'll have much greater production out of the 4 inch than the 1 inch. However, that's not always true. And we weighed all the samples from last year about a week ago, crunched the numbers, and in many of our plots, we found that the 1 inch actually outperformed the 4 inch, including one set of the plots here at Lyle's place. But you can explain a lot of that away because, number one, they're only getting clipped once a month. And a lot of information will say if you only graze it very, very infrequently and give it a long rest period, you'll still maintain a lot of productivity. And so I suspect that if we were to clip these every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we would see a much greater difference than we do now. But still, historically, I've seen, you know, more production at the end of the year out of a 4 inch than a 1 inch, which makes sense to me because you can see more leaf area there. So, second set of plots at Lyle Harter's farm here outside of Rudyard. And one of the observations that one of our group made, which is really important to point out, another difference between 1 inch and 4 inch plots is the 4 inch plot, which is this one, has obviously more residue covering the ground than when you look at the 1 inch plot, which was clipped almost right to the ground. There's less soil cover, less residue, and so over time the biological communities in the soil under the 4 inch are going to be stronger and healthier than what they would be under the 1 inch because of the greater amount of ground cover we have here, as well as it's another carbon source for the soil.
And in some places you'll hear organisms under the soil also being your livestock. If you don't keep that livestock good and healthy, then above ground for your real livestock won't be healthy either.
It's a symbiotic relationship. One helps feed the other.
Let's get down here. I can maybe get a little more slack down here.
The little fly control.